Hello, good afternoon and good morning. Welcome to today's presentation, Enforcing an Efficient Travel Risk Policy. My name is John Jackson. I'm Director of Information and Tracking at International SOS, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that today's presentation is being recorded, and you're currently in listen mode only. But I'd also like to say that this is an interactive presentation. There are a couple of ways that you can participate in today's event. First, a poll will be appearing on your screen shortly. Please take a moment to complete the poll. Secondly, you may type in any questions you'd like for our panelists on the right-hand corner of your screen in the Q&A panel. Click the send button and your question will be sent in queue. We encourage you to ask questions as they will be seen by the panelists, and we'll answer as many questions at the end of the presentation as we can. As a reminder, all attendees will receive a copy of the slide deck and a link to the recording along with key benchmarking data based on the poll questions. This will be sent to you in the next coming days. So let me introduce today's presenters. First, we have Matt Bradley. He's the Regional Security Director in the Americas for International SOS and Control Risks. Matt heads up the International SOS Travel Security Services in the Americas. Next, we have Solomon Razul, Group Product Manager for International SOS. Solomon has been with International SOS for 3 years, and he's based out of our London office. Solomon works with our teams and clients to create innovative and enhanced International SOS solutions. Now, as I said, I'm John Jackson. Now I'd like to take you to the agenda for today's webinar. So the number of things that we're going to be speaking to today. First of all, we're going to be talking about the importance of developing a robust and consistent travel risk policy. Next, we're actually going to focus on recent case studies based on real-life situations. Then we're going to focus on tools to implement and automate your policies to save time and make them effective for your travelers. And then we're going to actually focus on Travel Ready and provide a practical example of Travel Ready, our travel risk policy solution, and compliance solution that is used by one of our clients. So with that, let me pass the presentation to Matt. Matt?
Thank you, John. It's a privilege to be here with you and Suleiman talking about the very important topic of having a travel risk policy, one obviously that you can implement, but also one that is consistent with the values of your company. And I wanted to just start off today talking a little bit about what travel risks are. And you can see from these pictures on the screen in front of you that travel risk encompasses a very broad spectrum of incidents. Okay, we have insect-borne viruses up in the upper left-hand corner, down to natural disasters in the bottom right-hand corner, and terrorist incidents in the left-hand corner, and common crime up in the right-hand corner. And so when you're looking at when you're looking at developing a policy, you want to include all of these travel risks into that policy, because you don't want to leave anything in a gap that you may not be able to respond to your travelers when they're traveling overseas. As we know, risk always depends on your perspective. Okay, so we want to take a look at this perspective. We want to understand that limitation whenever we're looking at this. And when we talk about risk perspective, we're talking about your risk tolerance. And so we're looking at this picture here, and we see there's obviously been a car accident. We could have some injuries here. And this looks like it could be a bad situation. If we pull back just a little bit, we see that this is actually a quite precarious situation. All right, and that same risk tolerance of your company will drive your risk and your risk policy. And so we want to make sure that when we're looking at our risk policy and developing that risk policy, we take a very wide view of the risk and how we want to treat that, and then we move in and focus on specifics within that same policy. Let's talk about some of the practical considerations around developing your policy. First of all, how do you reassure and demonstrate to your employees that you care about their well-being while they travel or live abroad? Okay, we're all familiar with the duty of care concept, which says that your organization is responsible for the safety and security of your employees in the workplace and when they're traveling abroad for your business. And so you want your travel risk policy to be an extension of that duty of care when the employee leaves the office. What does having an efficient and well-maintained travel and safety policy really mean? I think efficiency is a critical piece because efficiency allows you to implement that policy. There's nothing worse than having a policy that obligates your organization to do something without it being efficient enough or without you having the tools to actually implement that policy. And well-maintained, what does that mean? It means making sure that your travel risk policy keeps up with the times, keeps up with the tools that are available to protect your travelers and to mitigate risks. How can you gain a better overview and practically monitor your travelers' trips more effectively while not wasting hours of your precious time? That goes back to the efficiency model. You have a policy, you're going to want to ensure compliance with that policy, but that can often be a very time-consuming job. And what we want to do is show you that there are tools out there that can help automate the tracking of compliance. Finally, how do you communicate your travel policy, validate itineraries, and ensure compliance? Again, often can be a job that makes implementing a policy very difficult. And so again, a policy without being implemented is not very useful. It certainly doesn't protect travelers, and it opens your company up to a variety of additional risks. So we're going to look at some of these things today when we talk about developing your policy. Here's a quick overview. So when developing the policy, it helps to save time and make your policies effective for your travelers. We're going to go into more detail on this, what you need to understand about the policy. What does location, information, and communication mean about in relation to your policy? How do you respond in case of an incident? And then how can you be proactive with a policy instead of reactive? As risk managers, we want to be proactive and preventative, not reactive, and paying those prices. Let's take a look at some of these in more detail. What you need to understand, okay? First of all, what is the risk? We saw in that very first slide the picture of all of the different risks that are out there. So you have to understand the nature of the threat and the hazard. I boil risk down to impact times the likelihood. So what is the impact of an event and what is the likelihood that it's going to happen? We're obviously going to be considering high impact but low probability events like terrorist attacks. But we cannot forget about moderate impact but more frequent events like common crime or road traffic accidents. Where your travelers are and what threats they're exposed to. Okay, you have to know what your exposure is. You have to be able to calculate your exposure and then the threats that exist for your travelers. How many travelers do you have in a location? What is your organizational likelihood of being in a particular location? We had one client where we analyzed their trip data over a year and a half, and it turned out that they spent the equivalent of 7 years in Mexico in just a year and a half. And so understanding how long will you be in a country, not just a single trip. What training have you done? What threats are your travelers exposed to? What training have you done for your travelers to prepare them to the threats that they will be exposed to? And how do you keep track of the training that you've done, who's been trained and who hasn't been trained? Ultimately, we know that even with the preventative model, we won't be able to prevent every incident. So when we need to, how can you respond? Okay, an effective response, preparation for response will help reduce the impact on your organization. Ultimately, again, we're talking about the duty of care, and your policy and the implementation of that proves that the company is complying with their duty of care. Let's talk about location, information, and communication. What you're seeing on the screen here is the first alert that we sent to clients following the attacks in Brussels, okay? If you look at just the headline, it provides the location, information, and a communication to you, all right? Tells you where it's at, Brussels, what has happened, 2 explosions, what's happening now, evacuation underway, what should I do about it, account for staff. Okay, when you're analyzing where you get your information and how you provide information, you want to make sure that you're also providing advice. There are lots of different places to get information from. You may have heard about Brussels from mass media. You may have heard about it from social media. But what you weren't hearing from those sources is advice on what to do. Information without advice leads to anxiety or panic. And so you want to make sure that when you're providing information to your travelers or whoever is providing information, they're also providing advice. If you look down here, we have advice here for managers and travelers. Okay, so if you're a manager, you know what you need to do. You need to account for your staff. If you're a traveler, here are some steps to get off of to safety. And the important thing is this went out within 30 minutes of the attacks being detected by our monitoring team. And so very little is known about what to do. It's not, we don't know about the airport. We don't know about the conditions. We're just pushing out this information and saying, this is what your immediate action should be. And then we will follow up with additional information as we're able to confirm it and additional advice for both managers and travelers. Okay, so you want to have this continuous communication flow, because if you lose communication with your travelers, then they will either make wrong decisions or feel like they're not being protected by their organization. Let's take a look at responding, okay? When you want to respond, you need to know, first of all, where the incident occurred, and then you need to know where your travelers are in relation to that incident. And so you want to have some type of tracking methodology, whether it's itinerary-specific tracking, whether it's an opt-in mobile check-in where the traveler can show you where they are, or whether it's an always-on tracking solution where you see breadcrumbs on the map. So here's the map that we sent with our alert, and it shows the impact zone around the bombings. So you have obviously a very large impact zone around the airport and a smaller area around the metro station. If you could see your travelers on the map in relation to these incidents, you would know whether or not they might be in trouble and how you would reach out to them. Communicating with your travelers and being able to confirm their status is also important, because that allows you to very quickly focus your resources on those travelers who need help, while those travelers who've indicated that they're safe will stand fast. Finally, we talk about a proactive approach, a risk management approach versus an event response approach or a reactive approach. Of course, as risk managers, we know that it's much cheaper to prevent an incident, whether it's a medical or a security incident, than it is to remediate that event afterwards. I mean, that's a simple principle of risk management. And so what we want to move from is this event response that says we put very little investment on the pre-incident. We have an incident, therefore we have this massive expense for remediation and recovery after the incident. We want to transition, and we want our policy to be in line with a risk management approach that says we're going to invest heavily in a pre-incident preparation. We're going to train our travelers. We're going to inform our travelers. We're going to provide risk mitigation tools for our travel risk managers prior to an incident. We're going to do everything we can to reduce the incident. Therefore, we should have fewer incidents, and the impact of those incidents should be less. Therefore, our recovery time and our recovery cost will also be less. So when you're creating your travel risk policy, you want to approach it from this risk management perspective. Finally, this is just an opportunity, just an example of what a travel risk mitigation matrix might look like. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you want to be able to consider this when you have your own travel risk policy. Obviously, you have a travel risk rating. You need to understand what the risk is in a particular location. We do ours by country. And so you have from insignificant to extreme. That then drives your mitigation measures. You talk about what restrictions or what restrictions you might place on travel, or what additional steps are needed to complete that travel. In the middle here, you have your mitigation measures. So your training, your situation briefing, your tracking and active monitoring, and your additional measures. What are required according to the risk? So it's all driven by the risk and the likelihood and the impact of those events in a location where they're going. And then finally, what additional approvals are necessary for travel. Having something like this very quickly and effectively communicates what your policy is trying to do. We're going to take a look at a couple of different case studies. I've already talked about the alert that we sent during Brussels, and it was very similar situation in Paris. I will compare and contrast the two of them. When we looked at Paris, the event was very quick, obviously very high impact, lots of casualties, but it was over very quickly. And so it occurred on a Friday evening. The airport shut down on Friday night, but was again open on Saturday morning. So we were not evacuating anybody from Paris on Friday night during the attacks. If you look back on what the advice was to stand fast. Even social media provided that same type of advice. If you think of the hashtag for the Paris attacks, it was open door, which meant get off the street. Okay, so if you were in a safe location, the idea was not to leave that location and try to head to the airport to get out on a flight. The idea was to stay where you were safe until it passed and then reassess the situation. In the Brussels attack, it was a little bit different because it was an attack on the airport, which then, until a couple of days ago, made it impossible to use the airport. So even that same day, we assessed that the airport was not going to be usable the next day. There was no reason to wait to see if it was going to reopen. We immediately began to move people to other airports so that they could continue their travel. When we look at these high-impact events, these are some of the questions that you're going to be asked in the moments after it happens and even the hours later. How many travelers do you have? So very quickly, how quickly can you calculate your exposure? Are they in need of assistance? How quickly, once you've calculated the exposure, can you confirm their status? Do they need help? Are they okay? How do you communicate with your travelers, and how do they communicate with you? You need a variety of methods. We saw that in Brussels, obviously the voice networks collapsed on the cell phone network. Even the SMS was down, okay, but data was still working. So did you have a mechanism for communicating either through data, which would be email, or via SMS whenever that came back up? What advice do you give to travelers? Okay, we push out automatic alerts to our travelers based on on our expectation within the travel tracking system that they're in that country. You want to have an automated alert system because time is precious. You need to get information to them and advice to them quickly. So you'll have an incident, you'll have a detection of the incident, you'll have the assessment of the incident and the creation of the advice. You need to push that out as quickly as possible. If you automate that, it helps reduce that time. What is your advice to senior stakeholders? We see this all the time in big incidents. So immediately after the incident, your CEO wants to know how many people do we have on the ground? What's their status? How quickly can we help them? What should we do about our other travelers? What should we do about something happening in the future? And then you begin, after the initial assistance has been rendered, you start to look at the bigger questions. What do we do in the next 48 hours? What do we do in the next 7 days? What do we do in the next 3 months? I was having conversations with clients a week after Paris about an event they had planned in March. So this was November, and we were talking about whether or not they should continue with an event 5 months down the road. So those are some of the, or 3 months down the road, those are some of the things that you're going to have to answer, and you have to prioritize these and then keep everybody informed. Let's take a look at one more case study. This is Zika. So we have medical risks as well. We know about the Zika outbreak, started in Brazil, spread to some other countries that have this mosquito, primarily affects, has the most significant effect on pregnant women, but your company needs to have a strategy for any emerging global health threat. We're looking at Zika today, but there might be something else tomorrow or something old that we just haven't considered that resurges. A couple of years ago, we were looking at Ebola. Now we're looking at Zika. We could go back to SARS or something else. And so does your policy check on people's understanding of the disease? Are you providing internal information, or is everybody getting their information from the internet? Are you able to direct them to a local expert resource for their concerns? So you send them the information. Your employees may come back to you with additional questions, and they may be concerned. Do you have the expert local resources to deal with those concerns? And then what about those who are most likely to be impacted? So, in this case, women travelers who may become pregnant or be pregnant, how do you either manage that travel before they go or help them whenever they come back? What resources are available for that? All of that and that ability to respond to this type of emerging medical threat is something that you want to contemplate in your policy, because it's not something that you want to be making up on the fly. All right? I think I'll turn it back over to John and stand by for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for really underscoring the importance of having good travel risk policies, given the recent events in Brussels and in Paris, the current Zika outbreak, as well as the range of risks that travelers face. So now we're going to focus on what you do as you put together tools to implement and automate your policies. Several considerations need to be taken into account. First of all, identifying the challenges. Also, assessing the risks based on your organization's requirements, the specific requirements, and that comes down to corporate culture as well as the range of travelers, location of travelers, where they're going. And how do you assure compliance to your policies? It's all well and good to actually have written policies, but having people actually follow them and making sure that they are complying to those policies is really important. And then additionally, how do you create a robust audit trail? Means by which you can actually make certain that your policies are in place, they're being complied with, and they're documented. So some of the challenges that you're facing when putting together a policy, as you see here in some of these bubbles here, do you have a policy that's based on manual processes that can get slow, cumbersome, and actually not reinforce the policies themselves? How do you monitor travelers who've overlooked the policies? Some travelers feel that they're seasoned travelers and they know everything and they can handle themselves, whereas they're ignoring potential policies, or maybe even your new employees, people who have just come on board and they're not even aware that there is a policy in place. What do you do about travelers who don't even read the information? They just need to get out there as fast as possible, and they really kind of skip over or turn a blind eye to information that's being provided, including policies that are in place. How do you ensure that you have a robust audit trail to ensure that you can prove compliance? If there is an audit in place, do you have the proper documentation in place? And then how do you make certain that the travel risk exposure is clear, that is very straightforward to your travelers as well as to your management team? So with that, what I'd like to do is hand this over to Suleiman Razul, who can speak to Travel Ready, which is a tool for travel risk policy compliance. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Suleiman.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Matthew. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So through Matthew and John, we discussed the importance of developing a robust policy, some of the challenges you face, and understanding and managing the risk. We'll now discuss the International SOS solution, as John mentioned, Travel Ready. So Travel Ready is a web-based tool. It's a web-based service which exploits the travel booking data to automate and help enforce your policies around travel, medical, and health and safety, collecting the trip-specific data, organizational compliance information, and opening up channels of visibility and communication between travelers and managers. Assessing the risk, so ultimately refining your risk assessment. So we all know travelers visiting high-risk destinations face more challenges. We see here an image of a Pretrip advisory. Now, the Pretrip advisory provides the foundations of fulfilling your duty of care, providing the automated, well-structured approach to the risks associated with a destination, whether they be medical, security, or both. Active in-country alerts and communication links, all provided to your travelers in an automated fashion. Now, organizations need to provide more appropriate preparational information to their travelers. especially for risky destinations. And we can see here, again, another image of the pre-trip advisory. Now, within this pre-trip advisory, we can see integrated the Travel Ready compliance link. So, again, in an automated fashion, communicated through to the travelers your compliance and policy-related text. So they know exactly where to find it. Now, e-learning confirmation, cultural familiarity, meet and greet procedures, audit of compliance, all of this is available through the Travel Ready service. And once integrated into the pre-trip advisory, along with the general risks associated with the destination, your travelers then have that foolproof pre-travel risk assessment that ultimately transfers the duty of care through to your travelers. Once that compliance-related link in the pre-trip advisory is clicked, the most appropriate questions for your traveler will appear within the Travel Ready form. So whether they be risk-specific, the traveler profile-specific, or ultimately logic-based, the immediate oversight is then provided once that traveler has completed and provided their information to the appropriate managers validating the form. So the call to action for any risks, for any active alerts in country, the manager will have the full oversight available to them directly via the Travel Ready service. The robust audit trail, so the proof of compliance, so instant notifications to the managers for validation, 24/7 access to the admin console to reference back for any traveler's information that they may have provided, and automated Travel Ready reports, ultimately providing the full oversight and preparation of compliance, ensuring organizations are not left open to any reputational risk in the amount or in the event of an incident. So the flow of information. So how does the Travel Ready service actually work? So what we can see on the top left-hand side here, your traveler makes a booking. We at International SOS receive that information and we process that information. We send out the pre-trip advisory and integrate it into that pre-trip advisory based on your risk parameters, whether or not the compliance-related link is included. So whether the traveler received that compliance-related text or not. Once they click into that link, the web form opens. The web form contains the appropriate questions based on the traveler's itinerary. Traveler provides the answers or the information which is requested from them. They submit that form, and the form is then emailed instantly to the validator or the manager, and the decision is made and tracked for this particular itinerary. As soon as that decision is made, again, additional notifications are sent out to selected parties. And as soon as that pre-trip advisory is triggered, you have full oversight, whether the trip is in a pending status, whether the traveler has submitted it and it's with the manager, or whether this traveler has fully complied or not. So putting the theory to one side, as John mentioned earlier, we'll look at a quick case study. So one of our clients, a large chemical company, who recently implemented Travel Ready. So just looking at some of their statistics, they have 9,000 travelers and presence in 80 countries. So they are a global organization. They are organized around 6 regional security teams. Their main challenge, they had a policy for high-risk countries, but this policy was very manual, controlled by Excel spreadsheets and emails. So very, very difficult to track. Also, the travelers were ultimately unaware or found it difficult to actually access the appropriate documents for compliance to this particular policy. So how did Travel Ready help? How did International SOS ultimately help refine their policy? I mean, first and foremost, refining their policy. Secondly, automating their policy with the Travel Ready tabular form. And by the tabular form, we actually mean we provided specific questions on the Travel Ready form itself, which were specific to this organization's policy. So whether it be meet and greet procedures, whether it be specific hotel providers that they would use in Algeria or in Nigeria. And at the same time, provided them with immediate oversight of risk to the local and global teams. So the regional teams receive the validation notifications, and the global team receiving the travel-ready reports and access to the admin console. So they knew of all the travelers who are compliant and non-compliant at any given time. End result, saved hundreds of hours per month across multiple teams, and this organization's compliance rate close to 90%. Just like to take you through a very quick demo of the actual travel-ready form itself. So you can now see on my screen a sample travel-ready form. Now immediately, as soon as the traveler clicks into the compliance-related link within the Pretrip advisory, a form similar to the one you see on the screen now would load. It contains the critical traveler profile detail, and on the top right-hand side, you can actually see the status of a form at any given time. It contains the full itinerary detail, so we can see this traveler, Suleiman Rasool, is going through to Nigeria. When they depart, when they arrive, the risks associated, and the carrier or the airline. We then have the specific set of questions based on this particular traveler's itinerary. So as this traveler is going through to an extreme medical risk, we can see there's some medical-related questions included. We can see the questions are actually mandatory, so the traveler is unable to submit the form without providing an answer to each of the questions. We've also introduced logic around the questions. So does this traveler own a smartphone? If yes, will it work internationally? Again, if yes, have they downloaded the International SOS application onto their phone, onto their smartphone? If no, here's the link. Go ahead and download the app now. And I just have to reference back to one of the case studies which Matthew mentioned earlier, where we had clients of ours during Brussels actually communicating out to the travelers via Travel Tracker, asking them to check in so they're able to detect their location and see exactly where they are. But without the traveler having downloaded the app and you having complete oversight over that, you are unable to make that determination. Have they read the generic advice sent out by the Pretrip advisory? Yes or no? If no, you can ultimately have them access the membership portal to be able to fully understand the advice or go back and read the advisory prior to travel. Now, this particular form is in a pending status, and what you see down at the bottom, specific options. Traveler is able to submit the form, save and return to the form at a later date, or add view comments or print the form if needed. Take it with them on their travels. Now we can see an additional form here, and this form is currently pending approval, so under business review. Now we can see in this particular case, Traveler Suleiman Rasool is going to Brussels and also to Nicaragua. And we can see again the full itinerary details and the associated risk for the full itinerary. Now what we can also see, and the traveler has submitted the form, is the answers. So from a validation point of view, the manager receiving this particular form will know exactly, okay, Traveler Suleiman Rasool, this is the most up-to-date cell phone number prior to traveling. This is their regional HR head, and they have downloaded the International SOS app on their phone. Now again, because this traveler is going through to lower risk destinations, there's not as many questions which actually appear here. So referencing back to the risk-based model, if your traveler is going to high extreme risks, you can ask for more comprehensive information. And for lower risks, again, a few questions around compliance to your policies. So in summary, the Travel Tracker solution will allow you to communicate out to your travelers by the SMS module or the email communications module. The Travel Ready service will allow and show you whether your travelers have complied to your policies and provide you with complete oversight. Foolproof reporting on a scheduled basis or 24/7 access to the information via the admin console or the notifications. And in the event of an incident, the proactive communication is sent out to your travelers containing specific advice. I'll now pass it back to John for any questions and answers and also the key takeaways. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Suleiman. And as we look back on these two sections, it's really, we've highlighted the importance of developing and putting in place a travel risk policy, as well as the tools for ensuring policy compliance and audit. So a handful of takeaways that we've got here of this presentation. First of all, perception of risk is not always realistic. So it's very important that in addition to the traveler seeing very close up what's going on, having the view from a large perspective of what risk is and put it in the policies that underscore that are very important. Having a travel risk policy that integrates risk mitigation is core to prevention, and prevention, minimizing whatever risks are there and potentially eliminating them. Compliance to a travel policy has to be demonstrated. So the policy itself is, can just stand there alone. That doesn't really do anything. Having the policy itself, having compliance of that is very, very important. An automated online solution really makes the risk mitigation policy compliance much easier, certainly easier than a manual policy. And these policies are living documents, living policies. So the policies and the processes themselves must evolve over time. They need to be revisited, ensure that they're up to date, ensure that they actually reflect the situation as well as the corporate and organizational environment. Now, I'd like to also do at this point is to review the early polling questions. Right now, the questions that were submitted, the answers to the questions were submitted at the very beginning of this presentation, so I'd like to go over this. Does your organization currently have a travel health and security policy in place? So 92%, I should say 92 out of 116 said yes, they do. 18 of those submitting responses say they only have a travel policy that deals with expenses. 2 say they don't have any policies at all, and 4 do not know. Who's responsible for ensuring compliance of the given policy? Of the 116 that replied, 30 of the responses say that HR is responsible for the travel policy compliance. 32 say the travel manager is responsible, and 47 say the security director is responsible. Third question was, do you find your travelers are aware of a given policy in the internal tools? Of the responses, 60 say yes, the travelers are unaware of the given policy. 29 say no, the travelers are aware, and 24 say they are unsure. So what I'd like to do at this point is to review some of the questions that we received and go through those questions. Also, if you have additional questions, there is a spot to send questions to. What I'd like to do at this point is to focus on some of the questions that we got. One of the first questions we received was, can we give an example of a meet and greet procedure? I'd like to open that up for, I think, Matt, could you address that?
Sure, John. Thank you very much. Meet and greet procedure refers to what happens upon a traveler's arrival in a given country. Okay, it's just a generic term that talks about what are they supposed to do. It comes from the time when the meet and greet was you would have somebody go out to the airport and pick that person up. It could be a driver. It could be a driver along with a host. And what we're saying is that needs to be built into your policy. So based on the risk of a particular country, upon arrival, a traveler might be able to take an airport cab directly to their hotel. In extreme or high-risk locations, they might need an executive protection team to pick them up and transport them. So when we ask that in that travel-ready form, do you have your meet and greet procedure down? It really means what is your ground transportation arrangements when you arrive in country.
Okay, thank you. Another question we received, if there's no security or in-house travel department, where do the duty of care obligations and travel risk policy management typically reside? Is it HR? Is it risk management? Where would that typically reside? Matt, do you want to answer that one?
Sure, John.
Or Solomon, I'm going to open it for both.
I'll start first, and if Solomon has anything he can add. The answer is it certainly depends. It can reside in HR, it can reside in risk management, it can reside in whatever department is looking at compliance. Okay, so a lot of times the travel risk policy, it could be, if your policy for travel resides with HR, then your travel risk policy typically will reside in HR. If your travel policy is in a different department, your travel risk policy should be with that same department. So a travel risk policy should always be read in conjunction and coordination with your general travel policy. And we can help you determine where that travel policy is and where's the best fit for your travel risk policy.
Okay, thank you. Before I get to the next questions, I do want to highlight for the attendees that we've got some additional polling questions that should be showing up on your screen, and we'd like you to take a look at those polling questions as well. Okay, let's go into some additional questions that have come up. In Travel Ready, will the travelers be able to access and submit forms via smartphone? Solomon, I'm going to open this one up for you.
Yep. Thanks, John. Completely accessible by smartphones, iPads, laptops, and across browsers. So to make it easy as possible for travelers and managers. So when travelers receive, they're able to access and submit via their smartphones. Managers are able to receive and validate via their smartphones as well.
Great. Thank you. When it comes to questions with regards to policy, is there a limit to the number of questions? Is there an average or a good number of questions that should be asked? How many questions can be asked as part of this process?
So naturally, it would depend on the policies of the given organization. I mean, the general trend that we see for the lower risk destinations, there's tend to be fewer, maybe 5, 6 questions, as opposed to the high risk destinations where organizations seem to be getting into the granular detail, as we've just discussed there, requesting additional information around meet and greet, accommodation, lodging, etc., and kind of in-country plans. So, I mean, there is no limit ultimately, but we wouldn't always recommend that, you make it overextend essentially the number of questions for your travelers. But the general trend is lower risk, fewer number, the higher risk. It can be a lot more, maybe, on average 20.
And I would just add, John, I would just add from the security director perspective that implementation of the policy is critical. So you're asking questions in these forms on which you expect to take some action with the results. And so you want to make sure that the travelers fill them out, but also that you're able to communication is generated by the question itself.
Thank you. Thank you. We received another question, which is, what happens if the traveler has not completed the form and submitted the answers to the travel compliance questions?
So by the system itself, we're able to set automated reminders, which go out to both the travelers and the managers. So if the traveler has not complied and submitted the form, we can set automated reminders. And if the manager ultimately hasn't validated the form, we can also send automated reminders to them. Alternatively, we can set manual reminders directly via the admin console. So the oversight team, whether it be HR, travel, or security, are able to manually reach out to their travelers with an automated notification, essentially, email notification which goes out to them, reminding them of compliance and the importance of it.
Great, great, good. So that it doesn't, it's just not just ignored, it actually, there is some follow-up with the traveler themselves before they travel. What if one of the approvers is not available? Does the system break down, or how do you actually make sure that that is actually, that the gap is filled?
Again, via the admin console, the travel ready admin console, the oversight team is able to supersede any approver. So they're able to provide the validation if an approver is unavailable directly via the admin console.
Okay. Another question. Our policy dictates that different requirements are made of to travelers going to different destinations. Can we have different forms for different destinations?
So it's never a different form, but we can, as I mentioned in the example or the case study earlier, the large chemical company, they're set up in exactly this way, where they have a set of questions per destination, which requires travel ready. So a traveler can be going through to 3 high-risk destinations in the same itinerary, and ultimately they can have a set of questions for each destination on the same form, and the set of questions which they receive again are ultimately determined by the policy.
Great. Another question, our organization has 2 levels of approval. How many approval levels can be supported within Travel Ready?
Within Travel Ready, we have the capability to support up to 3 levels of approval.
Great. That's good to know. Is Travel Ready a separate service? Is it a unique service that is added to the overall services, Travel Tracker and the rest?
I'm sorry, John, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, is Travel Ready a separate service? Is it something that is beyond Travel Tracker and the membership service provided by International SOS?
Yep, it's an add-on service. So Travel Tracker, again, the booking information we receive into Travel Tracker drives the Travel Ready service itself. But okay. So it's an additional service to Travel Tracker.
Okay. Another question, can we stop the ticket from being issued if a traveler does not comply?
We have the capability. I mean, ultimately, it would depend on the travel agency being able to support the service itself, ultimately, but we're able to trigger the notifications to go back to the agency. So if a traveler has not complied, the agency would then essentially not release the tickets for a given booking. Now, that would naturally need to be a conversation that would also need to be had with any of the travel management agencies. But referencing back to the case study I mentioned earlier, that's exactly how the large chemical company does use the service, where a notification is triggered back to their travel management agency, and they do not release the tickets until the notification of approval has been received.
Perfect. Got a question, I think, for Matt. Do you just help companies implement policies? What happens if and when the traveler needs help? Does the company take over, or do you help the traveler?
Thank you, John. We are a travel risk management company, and we provide a complete travel risk management solution. So we not only help companies create and implement their travel risk management policy, we are then assisting their travelers whenever they need help. So travelers call us every day, all day, hundreds of times a day for medical and security incidents, and we help them all over the world.
Great. Thank you. Last question I've got that I see here, how long will the process take from booking as far as utilizing the Travel Ready tool? Solomon, I think this might be for you.
Yep, thanks, John. Excuse me. So the pre-trip advisory itself usually goes out within an hour or two of booking. Once the pre-trip advisory has been received, it's ultimately in the traveller's hand from that point. But if the traveller was to submit the form, the notifications to the manager or the approver are pretty much instant. If the approver then instantly does access and approve the form, the notifications again from that point on will be instant. So it can be from a few minutes to a few days to a few weeks ultimately, all dependent on how reactive and receptive the travellers are.
Great, thank you. We're running out of time. What I'd like to do is, as you see on the screen, if you have additional questions after the webinar, please submit your questions to the email inquiries@internationalsos.com, or simply reply to the email that you will receive from us in the next few days. I want to thank both Matt and Solomon for their information on today's session, and I want to thank everyone for attending. This concludes this session. Thank you very, very much, and have a very good day. Thank you.